Welcome everybody to this session, track MI002, Integrating Innovation and Manufacturing Value Chains in Africa. As we know, this year's convention theme is Advancing Biomanufacturing in Africa through Innovation. And this track captures the essence of the entire convention in possibly the best way we could think of. With me today in the panel, I'm joined by individuals that have been involved in manufacturing in Africa for quite some time. So the theme is not a theoretical theme for them. They will share with us their practical experiences on how this has been done before even the pandemic, because a lot of the agency that we see today as a result of the pandemic as a huge event is something that we should have been paying attention to for some time. And I have here people I consider leaders in the space of manufacturing pharmaceuticals in Africa. I have Dr. Eugene Lottering, who is the doyen of innovators in South Africa, having been the founding CEO of the Innovation Fund, and subsequently transitioned to a pharmaceutical executive with a medium-sized, large pharma firm manufacturing in the continent. And next to him is Dr. Harmonization, who comes from the National Bioproducts Institute. And National Bioproducts Institute, NBI, we call it, is the largest manufacturer of bioproducts in the continent by volume. They manufacture blood proteins through protein fractionation. Excuse me if I sound like I'm twisting my tongue or I'm biting my tongue, because some of these terms are fairly new to me. And next to him is Robert Agiago, who works at the Africa Risk Capital, and they focus on responding to disasters and epidemics and the like. And he will take us through their process and some of the issues that one needs to look at. We know that the COVID pandemic is effectively a disaster, so we would love to hear from him his perspective. The way we will conduct the session is that I will invite each one of the panelists to provide a short presentation for the first 8 to 10 minutes. So each one has about 8 minutes to present their slides. And after they've presented, all three of them have presented the slides, we will then enter into a Q&A session. The Q&A, the watchers or the viewers can send through the chat box the Q&A. I also have my own questions, just to demonstrate that I've been listening to them and I'm not that dumb, not as dumb as I look, at least. So I will also ask them my questions from their own presentations. And I think with not much else to say, I would like to invite Dr. Harmonization to give us the first presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Dr. Msomi. I'd like to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay. Can you all see my screen? Sorry,
Yes, we can. We can see it. Please proceed.
Okay, and without the sorry, I'm just looking at my presentation. Can you see the first slide, the introduction?
Yes, we can. The title slide, yes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and apologies for that. I just needed to get to my presentation. Yeah, thank you, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present at the BioAfrica Convention of 2021. I would like to use this opportunity to introduce you to National Bioproducts Institute, or NBI for short, and discuss how NBI's core capabilities and spare capacity can be utilized to improve access to bioproducts, biopharmaceuticals specifically, to benefit public health care in low-income countries. We are all familiar with how biopharmaceuticals have revolutionized healthcare in high-income countries, including the treatment of cancer and chronic conditions such as autoimmune diseases, to name but a few. Unfortunately, most of these products are not readily available in low-income countries. There are many barriers to entry of these life-saving therapies, including high production costs, complex manufacturing processes, intellectual property considerations, greater regulatory oversight, and so forth. However, well-considered value chain integration can optimize the capabilities of various role players, thereby reducing costs and expanding distribution, ultimately to the benefit of the patient. The synergy between suppliers of APIs, especially biological products with complex manufacturing processes, and local companies with aseptic fill and finish capabilities can unlock the value of local production and supply and create a platform for further innovation and expansion. A textbook example of this is COVID-19 vaccines, as the pandemic necessitated the speedy integration of value chains to remove production bottlenecks, maximize output, and ensure much needed vaccines get into the arms of the global population. So I'd like to put forward NBI as a potential role player in biopharmaceutical value chain integration that can be achieved locally to the benefit of the South African as well as sub-Saharan African patients. So NBI may not be familiar to everyone in the audience, so I'd like to take a bit of time to tell you more about NBI and its products. Well, we are a fully fledged South African manufacturer and supplier of biopharmaceutical products and medical devices. We are located in Pinetown, close to Durban in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. We specialize in the production of therapeutic proteins that's derived from human plasma, using a process technology called cold ethanol fractionation to separate and purify the proteins of interest from the plasma. So our main products include clotting factors used in the treatment of hemophilia, immunoglobulins for intravenous administration, used in the treatment of primary immune deficiencies and so forth, human albumin. We have a dried plasma product, as well as a range of hyperimmune immunoglobulins. As you can see, our product packaging here in this image. We supply our products mainly to South Africa and several SADC countries, and we are in a process of expanding our registration in other countries, ultimately to supply them as well. Well, we are mostly self-sufficient with limited value chain integration at the moment. We manufacture mostly our own APIs from the human plasma. But to maximize final product availability, we also process APIs supplied by third parties. And then we outsource some QC testing as well as distribution. As a manufacturer and supplier of sterile injectable therapeutic proteins, we have all the elements in place to produce and test these under GMP. So our manufacturing environments include the grade C API production suites, grade C fill and finish areas, and grade A aseptic filling suite. We have large and small volume filling lines. You can see the volumes there, as well as an ampule filling line. Production is supported by utilities such as water for injection, pure steam, cooling systems, and so forth. We also have QA support functions, including QC testing of raw materials, intermediates, final products. So this includes extensive protein characterization and sterility testing. We also outsource some of these tests, including pyrogen testing, but we are hoping to soon have pyrogen testing done in-house. GMP production is supported by our pharmaceutical quality system that's maintained by our QA team, and we also have regulatory support from our regulatory and clinical affairs teams. So NBI's products are typically higher value, low volume products. And our manufacturing capabilities are geared towards our large volume products. At the moment, we have a significant spare fill and finish capacity with a combined total of about 500,000 units of small volume and ampule filling capability per month. So by utilizing this spare capacity, as well as NBI's core strengths and capabilities, we can get maximum benefit of the economies of scale. This in turn would lead to lower production costs, and therefore lower prices to the patient ultimately. So we have most of the requirements in place throughout the value chain to support the production of sterile biological products, such as COVID-19 vaccines, for instance, and biosimilars. However, what we don't have is access to the APIs at the moment. Therefore, strategic partnering is important to provide the missing elements in the pharmaceutical value chain. A phased approach to value chain integration can expand NBI's product offering in a stepwise manner, while managing the upfront investment that's required, the skills and manufacturing equipment, as well as the regulatory impacts that may be in place. So the initial opportunity that we envisage is the fill and finish of APIs, typically sourced elsewhere, and then at the same time modernize some of our filling capability, such as pre-filled syringes. And then in the next phase, we can further expand into local API production of these therapeutic proteins in a small-scale GMP facility to initially support GMP clinical trials and then production at a later stage. Product selection is quite important. We need to select products based on their benefit to local patients, the cost, manufacturing complexity, fit with NBI's current capacity and portfolio, and so forth. The products can be obtained through tech transfer or in-house product development. And at NBI, that's supported by our biotech department that has expertise in antibody production. At the moment, these antibodies are used mainly for diagnostics, but we do plan to expand into therapeutic proteins. But on the other hand, tech transfer offers the fastest route to the market. So an example here would be partnering with the likes of ICGB, which we've heard of in other sessions in this convention, to gain access to key biosimilars that may be of interest to our local market. Yeah, so that's my presentation. I would just like to say in summary that value chain integration with the right partners can expand NBI's product offering and our local capabilities, therefore unlocking our full potential that's in line with our vision to be the leading African manufacturer and supplier of quality therapeutic proteins to improve the lives of patients. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harmonization. I've just been alerted to the fact that I did not introduce myself. My name is Dr. Msomi Ntanta. I'm not Dr. Giorgio Regino. I'm standing in for him because he had an emergency after his earlier session that ended at 12. Just needed to make sure that people do not confuse me for Dr. Regino in future. Thank you, Dr. Harmonization. And I'd like to not waste any more time and invite Mr. Robert Ajako to give us his presentation now. Thank you, Robert.
Hello.
Yes, hello, we can hear you, Robert. You can start.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, if you can just put it in presentation mode.
Thank you very much. I will do that. Is it? Is it
yes,
okay?
We can see. Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. And apologies for the technological challenges. My name is Robert Ajako, has been said. I'm with the Africa Risk Capacity, which is a specialized agency of the African Union. And the work we do is in disaster risk management and finance for the AU member states, really supporting countries in the area of drought support, and now moving on to introduce disease outbreaks and epidemics. We do this through capacity building and also risk financing and insurance. We are not in the vaccine production business. This is an area that I, in the previous area work, was involved in remotely in the RTSS malaria vaccine development. But broadly, my background is in development and public health. And we bring to this discussion more on the contextual and also the broad picture of why it is important for Africa to invest in this. Greetings from Ibrahima Sheikh Diong, our assistant UN Secretary General, who could not be here with us. So straight on to what I want to share with you. It will be just 3 messages. One is that the continent Africa needs to understand that health is wealth. The second is also the need for us to take a charge of our needs, especially in the area of pharmaceuticals and biopharmaceuticals, and I think Andre spoke about that. And then the third is what are the opportunities for integration, manufacturing value chain. So first, let's look at what the problem is that we are dealing with. The continent has the highest disease burden globally. From the last global burden of disease report that came out in 2017, I can say that not much has changed apart from COVID. The fundamentals are still the same. It is a fact that we need to deal with. The WHO estimates that in 2015 alone, our loss of productivity measured in daily which is deaths and illness due to disease, is around $2.4 trillion. Now, if you just suppose this to the fact that the IMF also estimates the African GDP to be around 2.6 trillion. If we were a household, one can comfortably say that we spend as much or we lose as much on ill health as we make in income. With regards to the diseases or the etiology of the diseases, we're looking at the non-communicable diseases, the infectious diseases, HIV and AIDS, TB, malaria, and then also other neglected tropical diseases, as well as maternal conditions and road traffic accidents. However, the good news is that it is projected that with prudent investments in building the health systems, which would include investments in producing our pharmaceuticals and biopharmaceuticals, we will be able to, by 2030, save about 47–50% of the expenditure that the continent makes in this area on health. So I think this is something that I want to start from. I mean, you can talk about the health system in general, but here the focus really is on the importance of the continent taking charge of its manufacturing of the medication that it needs. Let's put some additional facts in context. Africa imports 80% of its medicines and medical products. This is from the Africa CDC. When it comes to vaccines, we actually import 99%. We produce less than 1% of the vaccines. The vaccine global doses about 1.3 billion, of which Africa uses 25% of that. But of that, we relied heavily on donor funding and also external support. A number of countries are in different phases, South Africa included, of vaccine production, but I think the more established ones will be Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, South Africa. We've had an example in Senegal. I think Senegal produces the yellow fever vaccine, which is, I think, the only WHO approved one. And a lot of the manufacturing on the continent is around fill and finish and labeling. And I think the Aspen work and what is happening in South Africa for COVID-19 is an example of this. And also mainly on the continent, I think production is within, they produce really for the internal market rather than for export. So there is potential here for us, those in industry, as well as governments, to look at the gap that we're facing, the amount of money that is spent in this area, and the importance of the continent investing on that. Let me quickly pivot to what are the challenges if you're going to go into this area, and some of the opportunities. So I think we heard from the first presentation that pharmaceutical production is a complex area of engagement. It requires time, it requires expertise, it requires finance, which is the process building of plants, maintaining them, products that has to come in, and raw materials and things of that nature. You haven't even spoken of the regulatory oversight and quality control. So it's an expensive venture, and those who are in the business can tell you between 50 to 700 million thereabouts needed for startups. Another area that the continent shoots itself in the foot is our diverse political ambitions, and the fact that we look at ourselves really in our small, sorry to put it in quotes, in our individual country, whereas we should be looking broadly as a market. And I'll give an example later. One other challenge is just getting WHO or certificate, GMP certification ranges between 1 to 5 years or more, depending on the preparedness of the country. And then generally our government's interest in import rather than supporting local production, which is a fact that we have to put on the table. So these are some of the challenges, but what are the opportunities? I spoke already of the volume that, and then the financial burden on the continent in the imports of vaccines. So this is an area that we can eat into if we invest and be able to make some savings there. Another area that we can, another example is by sheer population growth, and then also the fact that a number of our countries are going to graduate from the Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance's support. At some point, African governments need to step up and begin to put this into their budgets to be able to support. For example, Ethiopia annual vaccine needs is about 150 million, of which 100 million is donor support. So at some point, the country would have to put, and it plays itself differently in the 54 member states. But there's examples that we can follow. For example, you take Brazil. Brazil has a cohort of around 3 million every year. They produce and make sure that the market is there locally for them to cater for their markets, and even at prices similar to what UNICEF does. Examples are here in South Africa with current COVID-19. And then you have recently, I think, Senegal is also getting into partnership with the IFC to build on their yellow fever production and look into COVID-19. So if we begin to look at our markets in regions, regionalization, and also as a continent, and break out of the individual country thinking, then the market does exist. So the question is, what is the cost benefit of getting into this? If you're looking at individual country, perhaps it will be difficult, but I think what we need to do here is to look at much broadly on a continental scale or on a regional scale, and integrate the manner in which production and also supply can be for a wider population than what we have. So broadly, this is to set into the context of the importance of getting into this area. Thank you very much, Dr. So.
Thank you for that excellent presentation, Robert. I think before we move on to the next presentation by Dr. Eugene Lottering, just an observation. One is that Dr. Harmonization gave us a flavor of how to break up the manufacturing value chains. Importantly, the availability of a large-scale full finish, where he is coming from at MBI. And what Robert has just shared with us was more about sizing the demand of this product in the continent. And I'm hoping and I'm looking forward to the next presentation by Dr. Eugene Lottering, where having satisfied ourselves that should we be able to produce the APIs and the inputs of the full product, what should we be doing around upstream capabilities? What strategies should we be looking at, particularly when we think about how do we compete with countries where these high value upstream inputs have been commoditized? I look forward to hearing a bit about a strategy that could push things forward for the continent. Dr. Lottering, over to you. You are muted, Dr. Lottering. You are muted, microphone. Eugene.
Got you. Thanks, Dr. Mswami. I'm from a company called MCZ Pharma. I'm going to talk to you a bit about API manufacturing, which is a passion of mine. I cannot see why on the African continent we cannot go into API manufacturing. If we look at the recent COVID, nowadays we talk before COVID and after COVID. If we look at what has happened during this period of COVID and the price increases that have happened, this is from the Times of India newspaper. There's been an increase in paracetamol of about 139%, metformin about 124%, and so it goes down the list of products. And not only on the product side, on the packaging material side, increase of 100%, shipping and freight 360% of a 40-foot container, 233% of a 20-foot container. These problems, as they affect India, affect us as well, because we are totally reliant on India for import of all our APIs, specifically in life-saving medications like antiretrovirals, which is an area of my interest. Unbeknownst is that India itself is reliant on its key starting materials and other intermediate chemicals on China. 70% of all APIs and key starting materials and intermediate chemicals that are used by Indian API manufacturers come from China. And in this regard, when COVID happened and China shut down its borders and affected India, India was unable to supply all its global clients with the APIs that they require and also the finished products that they make. What they have done then in 2020 is already put a program into place to promote bulk drug parks and produced incentives for companies to make 57 of the products that they have identified as key APIs that need to be made inside India to make them more self-reliant. We need to do the same in South Africa, and as you heard from the previous speaker, and the rest of the African continent. I see no reason why we can't establish an API hub in South Africa, at least starting out with the products that address the burden of disease that we have in South Africa and also in Africa. In my journey in this regard, I attended a symposium on continuous flow reactors. Continuous manufacturing is the new advanced manufacturing technology that is being introduced into the pharmaceutical sector. At the symposium, a presentation was done by the head of R&D of Sanofi, Alain Rabion, who was presenting on a one-stop method that they had developed in partnership with the University of Durham and MEPI to make an antifungal product called flucytosine. I then spoke to them to try and access this technology, to manufacture this technology locally for use throughout the African continent. This is essentially the pilot facility that was conducted by MEPI. MEPI is a continuous manufacturing and engineering shop based in France. For the chemists and chemical engineers in the audience, the most expensive part in this process is the SiC reactor, which is silicon carbide reactor, which costs about 1.2 million euros to put into place. The rest are ready-made pumps and valves that are readily available. Of interest to me is breaking that up into segments that I needed to know in terms of manufacturing the product locally. For commercial scale reactor, there's a Corning reactor which is available, as indicated. They had isolated in the pilot scale, they were able to get a yield of between 73 and 80% at a purity level of 98%. And when they recrystallized the product, it went to a purity level of 99.8%, which of course exceeded the pharmacopoeia standards of the US and the EU. And with a yield of 80%, it meant that this product could be manufactured industrially. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Where we are now, we're conducting feasibility and basic engineering studies. We're going to select one of two service providers internationally. Key to this is a fluorination step. We happen to have fluorination expertise in South Africa via Pelchem. So the product can be manufactured. And in a couple of years, we hope to deliver a turnkey plant facility for the manufacture of flucytosine. The importance of flucytosine, besides its being an antifungal, it's also an input chemical into the manufacture of emtricitabine. Right now, in government tender for ARVs, they're asking for about 300 tons of emtricitabine and about 2,300 tons of lamivudine. This work is being done in partnership and consultation with Professor Watts at Nelson Mandela University. So in about a couple of years, we should have a turnkey plant for continuous manufacturing of flucytosine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Lottering. I would like to invite the audience to post their questions on the chat box. But before that happens, I'm going to use my facilitator's prerogative and just maybe ask the individual panelists a question that is directly related to their presentations. The first person to, I think will draw the straws, and I think I've drawn Eugene's name because he's just finished. So I'm hoping that it's still fresh in his mind. I have a question, and I think it stems from the presentation that Robert made earlier on, around why is there a need to manufacture locally if the Far East is cheaper? Why would you? Because one of the biggest arguments has always been that we cannot compete with the Far East, and that is whether India or China, from a price perspective. Why do you think there's a need for us to pursue a local manufacturing? By local, I mean a Pan-African manufacturing play when we can get these things cheaper from the Far East? And how can innovation, just as an additional point, how can innovation ensure that we are competitive in terms of cost and in terms of quality?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nsomi, and thank you to my co-panelists. It's good hearing your perspectives as well, which enriches mine. I think that there are a number of ways you can look at this. One is the short-term response is what we all say, that is far cheaper now. But if anything, COVID-19 has shown us that when push comes to shove, when everyone needs vaccines, we are always the last in the queue. It was the same for the H1N1 pandemic, which wasn't full-blown like this one. In that one also, Africa is the last to receive. You go back 20 years in the HIV and AIDS pandemic, when it was budding in Africa, we were the last to have access to ARVs. So it is really not, it's not feasible. It is not something that we can keep doing. It's imperative for our health security for us to invest in. It may not be, the short-term investment may not yield the gains that we're looking for, but I think for long-term, as a continent and as a people, that sustainability is there for us to take into it. For those who are in the business, I think Eugene and Andre can tell you, there is, if it was a business that they lose every time, I'm sure they wouldn't be investing in it. So there is some cost benefits there. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but clearly, if you look at it from a health security point of view, a continent of 1.3 growing million people cannot be reliant on other people's benevolence. And in times of crisis, we find ourselves, a whole continent, only about 2% vaccinated, while others are fully vaccinated. So when you look at it from those perspectives, it is something that we need. It is imperative that Africa needs to invest in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe you, Dr. Lottering, you want to take a stab on your point of view from a science perspective?
I think it's a competitive edge that companies in the Far East and elsewhere have utilized against us in saying that it can't be manufactured locally. Batch manufacturing technology has been available from the 50s on and is used throughout the pharmaceutical sector, both in API manufacturing and formulation plants. It can definitely be done. Furthermore, beyond batch manufacturing technology, firstly, if you calculate the costs, our costs, our environmental costs versus production in India and China, if you did it locally, we came to an indication that you would sell 12% overall by doing it locally than doing it in the Far East. And of course, security of supply is increasingly becoming an issue. If you look at advanced manufacturing technology like continuous manufacturing, you reduce that cost, operational cost, by upwards of 30%. So it can be done both by utilizing existing technology or new advanced technologies to manufacture products locally.
Thank you, Dr. Lottering. I'm going to turn to Dr. Harmonization. Strictly speaking, you manufacture biopharmaceuticals, and these would also include vaccines and biosimilars. My question, coming from a low-income setting, is how do you think you would select biopharmaceuticals that you would manufacture locally? By locally, I mean in the African continent. What would be your criteria if you were to choose this? And how would that be related or linked to innovation? And I suppose Dr. Ajaku Robert already mentioned that there is a demand that is driven by a public health need. How would you, as a private company, select the biopharmaceuticals to manufacture?
Yeah, certainly that selection is quite important. I would say first and foremost, there must be that therapeutic need, and from Robert, just the need in terms of public health care in Africa, infectious diseases, chronic diseases. So it would first and foremost be which products would have that benefit, healthcare benefit. Then availability of the manufacturing technology through tech transfer or perhaps even in-house development, even though that would take us much longer. And I would say speed to the market is certainly important. Then there is the compatibility with what we've got in place. So I mentioned our strength in manufacturing protein therapies, characterizing those, the filling capabilities that we have. So a match with what we've got in place would definitely also play a key role in that selection. And applying innovation to that is all, in my opinion, about at every step of the way, how can we do things differently, reduce costs in manufacturing, in distribution, in getting the product all the way to the patient, to reduce those costs and improve access. It could be applying automation. It could be actually looking very specifically at patient needs in the healthcare setting where the products are used, and applying that to the packaging that we employ. Patient-ready packs, for instance, to make lives easier of patients. So it's actually, as much as I give a very general response, innovation can be applied throughout this value chain, ultimately to improve access to products, of products to patients. I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Harmonization. The next question comes from the delegates. and I think it's directed more towards Robert. Should the AU Ministries of Health and the consolidated or harmonized AU regulatory bodies, as we know that these are being put together, should they be spending a bit more time encouraging Far East manufacturers to partner with African firms by way of transferring the technology and the like? How would you look at that as a possibility to deal with issues of security of supply? Robert.
Thank you. I think the AU is actually working a lot in this area. There's a team led by Dr. Michel CDB. I think they're looking at harmonizing medicine, the procurement of medicines on the continent. So there's some work happening there. And then you talk also about the efforts that are going into manufacturing. But I have a few examples of how we can do this. There is a Senegal example recently of I spoke about with funding from IFC to help them. They already have the capacity to improve on that for COVID-19. Here in South Africa itself, you have a public-private partnership between government and then the Pfizer biotech, BioVac work that is happening on COVID. We also have experiences that I think I spoke about happening in Brazil, which is more a state support for looking at their population. So I think it is a mix. We have to look at where the capacities exist and where the technologies exist and partner with them. And yes, the African Union and our individual governments must partner with the Far East, as you said, the India and Thailand and co. But I don't think that we should look outside so much. I believe that on the continent, as we speak, there are capacities here. If there's one area that is lacking, it is actually in investing in our existing brains and capacities and the potential that we have here. And I believe that we will be able to compete favorably with if it's competition that it is. So it should, let's look within what we have, start with the diseases, the neglected tropical diseases, the HIV and AIDS, malaria and co, the things that we can deal with. And then we look elsewhere to see if we can help. Partnership of every sort is good, but when you have potential within house, I would say, let's look at what we have and then we partner with others to build on that. Thank you.
Dr. Msomi, I think in addition, the examples that were put there by Robert, for example, in India, and I alluded to that, they have identified 56 products that they are dependent on that come from China, APIs. We have to similarly make identification of products that we utilize maximally within the country, within the region, within the continent, and focus on developing those particular products and the capacity to manufacture those products. We all need, the whole continent is reliant on WHO essential medication. So we can start by identifying what products we need in high volume and start making those particular products locally, which then restricts the importation that we are so reliant on.
Thank you, Dr. Lottering. Interestingly enough, I have a question that was going to be posed to you, exactly that, which was posted by Dr. Molefe on localizing manufacturing to ensure security of supply and prioritizing Africa's health agenda. But I think you've adequately answered that in terms of prioritizing. And I think Robert has also answered the issue of bringing the regulatory authorities in a harmonized fashion so that when you choose those priority products, we are in a good position to know where to focus based on public health needs. My last question that I'm going to request each one of the panelists to just give us a 3 minutes answer it's really how to link the different aspects of this track, innovation and manufacturing. Innovation is driven from a science base, from discovery upstream, and manufacturing is an industrial issue. I just want to know that as much as we have, and Dr. Lottering, you gave a presentation on continuous flow, and Dr. Khemisezen, you gave a presentation on some of the technologies that are intrinsic to how you produce products, biopharmaceuticals. I'd like to know, how do we get to a point where our innovation, our capabilities for innovation, not just innovation from a perspective of new products and groundbreaking inventions, but innovation from creating value, whether that value is economic or otherwise. How do we get to a science industrial complex that delivers the capabilities that we need to have security of supply? How do we do what India did 30, 40 years ago? How do we do what China did when the late Deng Xiaoping declared the following decade or decades as decades for China? How do we bring our science and innovation to the fore so that it supports our manufacturing ambitions? And I'd like to start with Andre and move on to Dr. Lottering, as well as maybe Robert can close on. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think this excellence exists in various pockets throughout academic institutions, private companies, the likes of the CSIR and so forth. At NBI, I mentioned we have our biotechnology department that has key skills in some of the production technologies we're talking about here, bioreactors and so forth. I think it's key to use platforms like the one that we are on at the moment to share, first of all, to collectively agree on what are the priorities, what is needed, who can do what, and add investment to that to maximize what we have available and to achieve ultimately the development of key products, go through the regulatory and the clinical evaluations, clinical evaluation, regulatory approvals, and ultimately to production. I think we will always be competing with importers of these finished products from the US and so forth. As I mentioned, there's all these barriers to entry and things such as exchange rates, the single exit price, and all of those are things that we are good at managing, but which can limit entry of those products. So careful selection of the products, the key skills that we've got to manufacture, and then just working together, I would think, is what's needed.
Thank you. May I request Dr. Lottering? Thank you.
I think we got to acknowledge, first of all, that the pharmaceutical sector in South Africa is a generics industry. And it sometimes clashes with what comes out of university, which is, of course, driving for innovative and new research projects. And that tends to guide it away from the particular industry. The entry point, if you accept that it's a generics industry, then we go to recognizing that the law in South Africa permits research and development on existing originator products 5 years before the expiration of the patent. That is a tremendously long time and a tremendously big opportunity from a pharmaceutical sector perspective of developing a new product or reverse engineering an existing product and incrementally improving that product to put into the particular sector. Then we need to develop a specific pharmaceutical hub where, like the other examples of India and elsewhere, where the common facilities that all pharmaceutical companies are going to need, effluent treatment, solid waste, dealing with solid waste, purity of water, good energy supply must be put into place. And I think the Gauteng Province Industrial Development Zone is trying to put together a specific hub of that sort. And then I think you need somewhat of a disruptive strategy within the pharmaceutical sector in South Africa, in that things are still done in the old way pre-1994. And the same ties are in existence, and therefore the industry can continue as is. We need to find ways to transform the sector and create opportunities for new entrants into the marketplace, new Black-owned companies to come into the marketplace and supply, and in such way the industry will grow. Thank you.
Thank you. The last word for Robert, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nsomi. I think there are a few areas that I can add to the discussion. My co-panelists have spoken about this, but if there's one area where we need to start from, I think the first is political will. Our governments need to come to the table and support these burden pharmaceutical work that is happening on the continent. I'm looking at the map that I shared earlier. There is work in Egypt on typhoid. So there's so much happening that we need to really connect together. It is a public-private partnership with academia underpinning that with the science. A lot of the COVID work has been work that has been done in academic institutions that has seeped into industry. So we need to also begin to connect those dots around how we benefit from all those research and the collaboration around scientific partners on the continent. There is a need for capital, local as well as external capital. And I think investment is needed in this field for us to go beyond the 1% production that we have. So capital holders in Africa with their collaborators must begin to look at this as an area of incentive. A fourth area will be harmonization. I think the African Medicines Agency will begin to provide us with that harmonized platform where we can have medicines from one part of the country move, a continent that is move around without the registration that is needed from every place. I think those are all barriers that needs to be dealt with. And then finally, I think individually, we need stringent regulatory bodies in as well as a supra-continental stringent regulatory body to ensure quality of the medicines that come out. So these are some of the areas that I believe my contributors has also spoken about that can help us to really move the agenda forward. Thank you, Dr. So.
Thank you so much. I think you had such an insightful discussion, which unfortunately has come to an end. And I would like to thank the panelists for such a robust engagement. And I am very, very positive or optimistic that there will be another discussion like this, because if there was a time that a discussion of this nature was needed, it is now. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for the viewers for taking the time to listen and for posting the questions. To those who've posted questions that were not answered or asked, we would follow up with written answers to them because we will provide or forward the questions to the panelists. Thank you so much. The session is adjourned. Thanks.